I met Ryan on a Tuesday. He'd just been hired as the new VP to lead the department into the future. The guy was all slick hair, tight shirts, and way too much self-assurance. He had that Silicon Valley swagger, the fast talk, the confident handshakes, the smile that never quite reached his eyes. From the moment he walked in, you could feel his vibe. This was a guy who liked to be in control, and he wanted you to know it. Ryan's first move was to introduce a streamlined process he promised would improve efficiency. It was all buzzwords: agile, innovative, disruptive. But something about it felt off. He acted like the system was the cure to every problem we had, but it seemed more like a way to look busy than actually get things done. In the first week, it was clear the guy didn't care for checks and balances. He started making calls that bypassed our usual processes, and no one seemed to question it. Greg, my boss, the guy who used to sweat the details, just shrugged it off. "Growing pains," he said. "It's part of the transition." I didn't buy it. My gut told me something was wrong. I started noticing things, big things. Vendor documents that should have been filled out were missing fields. Contracts were getting signed off without the usual reviews. Ryan's signature was on all of them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't following any real process. I tried to ignore it at first. I wasn't high enough on the ladder to speak up, and Greg was giving Ryan free rein, but it kept nagging at me. Something didn't sit right. I'd been around long enough to spot the signs of a company starting to skate too close to the edge. The more I saw, the more I realized that what Ryan was doing wasn't just sloppy, it was deliberate. I dove deeper into the vendor files after hours. It wasn't easy to pull old and new documents, but I needed a comparison. What I found was chilling. Fields were often missing in the high-dollar vendor contracts, the ones that Ryan's team had rushed through the system. But it didn't end there. I dug further into our compliance history and found that Ryan had altered the onboarding SOP himself. He'd cut out key compliance steps and sped up the vendor approvals, leaving gaping holes in our records. I printed everything out, hard copies just in case. The digital stuff could be wiped, but paper? That was harder to erase. I wasn't just seeing mistakes anymore. This wasn't an error or oversight. Ryan had created a system to bypass compliance on purpose. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that nobody seemed to care. They were too busy patting themselves on the back for being innovative. I didn't know how deep the problem ran yet, but I was sure of one thing. This wasn't just bad management. It was fraud. I wasn't going to let this go. So, late that night, after everyone had left, I pulled up the vendor files. I started comparing the old contracts with the new ones, and it didn't take long for the gaps to jump out at me. The same fields were missing from the high-dollar contracts, ones that should have been filled out. These were the vendors Ryan's team had rushed through the system, the ones with the deadlines that were too important to wait for reviews. I dug deeper. The more I went through the documents, the more I saw a pattern, one that wasn't just sloppy, it was methodical. The onboarding process was supposed to have checks in place, procedures, but there was nothing about this process that felt standard. It wasn't just a mistake. This was a change. And I wasn't buying that it was for efficiency, like Ryan claimed. I found a trail. Ryan had altered the SOP, cutting out steps that had been there to ensure vendors were properly vetted. The new system pushed vendors through faster, skipping crucial compliance checks, leaving huge gaps in our records. It was as if the whole point of the system was to gloss over anything that might slow down the innovation Ryan promised. I didn't trust digital records anymore. Too easy to delete, to manipulate. I printed everything, every contract, every email, every change log. Paper wasn't perfect, but it was harder to erase. I kept imagining how easily everything could disappear if I wasn't careful. So I stacked the documents into a binder, each one more damning than the last. But I wasn't expecting the kicker. I thought I'd uncovered a mess, a sloppy system, incomplete records, but as I kept flipping through, something made my stomach drop. There it was, a contract dated a week ago with a vendor whose approval had been rushed through. I checked the digital record, and sure enough, Ryan had backdated the signature. The document was stamped as signed 2 weeks earlier. It was like the whole thing was a house of cards. Ryan wasn't just pushing vendors through without the proper documentation. He was making it look like everything was in order, as if nothing had ever been out of place. My pulse picked up. I hadn't expected to find this. The smoking gun was in my hands, and it was worse than I could have imagined. He wasn't just cutting corners, he was making it look like everything was legit, covering up the fraud in plain sight. I didn't have the full picture yet, but it didn't matter. I had enough to know this wasn't going away. I'd have to play this carefully. Ryan's system was designed to hide the evidence. It wasn't just poor management anymore. This was a calculated risk, and it was only going to get bigger. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. I had what I needed to start making my next move. I couldn't let it go. I'd been around long enough to see when a company was about to crash and burn, and this felt like one of those times. So I sat down and wrote a memo to Greg. I kept it calm, professional, pointing out the issues with the new compliance process, the gaps in the vendor documentation, and how Ryan was circumventing the checks that had always been in place. I laid it all out, one step at a time, so there'd be no mistaking it. A couple of hours later, Greg's reply popped into my inbox. I opened it, expecting a serious conversation. Instead, I found a dismissal. "Let it go," he said. "Ryan's shaking things up. It's a growing pain. We'll be fine." I stared at the screen. Greg, who had always been a stickler for the rules, was now brushing me off like I was overreacting. He even added a line about how agility was the priority now, like speed was somehow worth more than accountability. I didn't get it. If we didn't have our foundation solid, there was nothing to build on. I wasn't ready to drop it, though. I couldn't just sit back and watch this company get pushed toward the edge, so I went to the legal department. I didn't hit them with everything I had, but I sent a private message, hinting at potential issues down the line. I didn't accuse anyone of anything outright, but I made sure they understood the risks involved. I needed them to be aware, just in case this thing went south. Meanwhile, Ryan dug in deeper. Every time I tried to voice concerns, he brushed me off. His focus was on results, pushing vendors through faster, cutting more corners, acting like compliance was just a roadblock to his vision. I could see it in his eyes. He was more entrenched than ever, and the more he ignored the warnings, the more he dug himself into a hole. When I pointed out that the speed might be causing more problems, he gave me a mocking smile. "You're too focused on the process," he said, "when you should be focused on the outcomes." It wasn't just his dismissive attitude that bothered me. It was the fact that he didn't care. He wasn't even pretending to follow the rules anymore. And the worst part, it was working. His charm, his smooth talk, and his obsession with disruption were winning people over. As for Greg, he was increasingly silent, more interested in appeasing Ryan than questioning him. It wasn't just that Ryan was ignoring me, it was that Greg was letting him. The disconnect between us was growing. I started to feel like an outsider. There were no more emails, no more invites to critical meetings. Ryan had sidelined me, and Greg, who used to be my ally, was now part of the problem. The worst part? It was like nobody wanted to see what was happening right in front of them. I was losing ground, and I could feel the walls closing in. It started small at first. Ryan canceled my recurring meetings. At first, it seemed like a scheduling thing. No big deal. But then the next week, the same thing happened again. And again. Eventually, I realized he wasn't just getting rid of my meetings. He was sidelining me. I noticed he'd replaced me with a younger team member, someone who was all about the buzzwords and less about the details. She was eager to jump into Ryan's disruptive vision, even if she didn't have the experience or the knowledge to understand the long-term consequences. It wasn't a surprise that she fell right in line with him. I tried to push back. One afternoon, I cornered Greg in his office. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. "I've been cut out of the loop on the vendor process. I've been handling this for years. Why am I being replaced?" Greg didn't even look up from his screen when he answered. "We're streamlining, empowering teams to work more independently. Ryan's just trying to push things forward faster." That was it. No acknowledgement of the fact that I'd been the one handling compliance for years. No discussion about how my input was being erased. Just more corporate jargon. It wasn't just that he didn't care about what I was saying. It was like he didn't even hear me. I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan's game plan had always been to get rid of anyone who might question him. He didn't want feedback, didn't want resistance. He wanted people who would fall in line, execute, and shut up. And now, I was that problem. The isolation started to creep in. No more emails about important updates. No more invites to critical meetings. I wasn't even asked for my opinion on decisions that used to be mine to make. I was being erased. The worst part? It wasn't just Ryan. Greg, who I used to trust, was becoming part of the problem. He wasn't defending me, or even acknowledging the concerns I raised. He was letting Ryan run the show, as if everything was fine. I could feel myself becoming invisible. Every day I was pushed further into the background, and the more I fought to be heard, the quieter I seemed to become. It was clear now. Ryan didn't want me around, and Greg wasn't going to do anything about it. The shift was happening in real time, and it felt like I was powerless to stop it. I was going through the onboarding policy when I found it. The change Ryan had made without legal approval. The new rule was simple, too simple. It allowed vendors to be approved without the required certifications, as long as Ryan signed off on them. No checks, no balances. Just Ryan's signature, and that was enough to push them through. I sat there for a long time, staring at the document. I knew this was a game changer. I had already seen the missing signatures and the backdated contracts, but this was worse. This wasn't just about sloppy paperwork. It was about an intentional breakdown of the system, an open invitation to bypass compliance altogether. I dug through our compliance history, combing through weeks of vendor approvals, and what I found confirmed everything I suspected. Ryan had been approving vendors without the proper documentation for weeks. Some of them were minor contracts, but others, high-dollar, critical vendors that could put us in serious trouble if they were ever audited. The scope of the problem was so much bigger than I realized. This wasn't just about missing signatures or a few contracts being pushed through too quickly. This was a pattern of negligence that could bring the entire company down. If this ever came to light, if anyone with the right authority looked into it, we'd be exposed for everything we'd gotten away with so far. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't stay silent. The stakes weren't just about a few missing signatures anymore. It was about the entire integrity of the company. I wrote a memo. This time, I wasn't just talking to Greg. I wasn't going to waste time with someone who'd already proven he wouldn't listen. I sent it directly to the CEO, outlining the breach in compliance, the risks we were taking, and the potential fallout if this continued. I didn't sugarcoat it. I laid out exactly how Ryan's actions had put us all at risk, how his changes were already creating gaps that would be hard to cover. I hit send and sat back, waiting. An hour later, Ryan cornered me in the hallway. His eyes narrowed when he saw the folder in my hand. Clearly he knew I wasn't just trying to get his approval anymore. "What's this?" he asked, a sharp edge in his voice. "It's a memo to the CEO about the compliance issues with your new process," I said, keeping my voice steady. Ryan's laugh was more like a scoff. "Compliance? Come on, you're really going to act like this is a big deal?" His tone was mocking, dismissive. "You really think the CEO's going to care about a few signatures?" I didn't answer. He wasn't asking for my response. He was trying to make me feel small, to brush me off, like he always did. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill," he said, brushing past me as if I wasn't even there. "But I'm sure you'll feel better after running to the CEO. Let me know how that goes." I watched him walk away, and for a second I thought about how easy it would be to let him have his way. Maybe he was right. Maybe the CEO wouldn't care. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about signatures. It was about something bigger, something I wasn't going to let go. Ryan might have brushed me off, but I wasn't backing down, not this time. I walked into the board meeting with all the evidence in hand, contracts, change logs, emails, everything I had painstakingly gathered. I thought maybe, just maybe, the CEO would finally take me seriously. But when Ryan saw me sitting there with the binder, he just laughed. "Oh, here we go," he said, flashing a grin to the board. "I'm sure my name has another bedtime story to tell. What's next? The boogeyman in the compliance closet?" He didn't even try to hide the sarcasm. The room erupted in laughter, and I felt my face flush. Every fiber of my being wanted to stand up and argue, to tell them all what I'd uncovered. But that wasn't going to work. Not here, not now. Not with Ryan playing the role of the charming, untouchable VP, and everyone else hanging on his every word. His charisma, his slick talk, it was winning people over. Even the CEO, who had been quiet so far, nodded along like Ryan was making valid points. Every time I opened my mouth, I felt smaller. The evidence I had wasn't enough to pierce through the image Ryan had built. He was smooth, he was confident, and no one was listening to me. I realized then that this wasn't about fixing things from the inside anymore. I'd tried that. It wasn't working. So I did what I had to do. I started quietly preparing. I went back to my desk after the meeting, locked the door, and began organizing everything. All the contracts, every email, every piece of documentation that showed the holes in Ryan's process. I wasn't going to rely on them seeing the light just because I presented the facts. If I wanted to get through to these people, I'd need a different approach. I didn't let the humiliation of being mocked get to me. I kept my head down, focusing on one thing, building my case, bit by bit. The paper trail I was creating wasn't going to go unnoticed forever, not if I played it right. As I started making my plans, I knew that the board wasn't going to care about the mess Ryan had created, not until it was too late. But I didn't need them to care right now. I didn't need them to see the truth yet. The truth would come out in the end. Ryan's downfall was just beginning. It might take time, but it would happen. And when it did, I'd be ready. One morning, it finally happened. A letter from the Federal Office of Vendor Integrity landed on the CEO's desk, asking for detailed documentation on several vendors Ryan had pushed through the system. I wasn't surprised. I'd been waiting for something like this. But watching Ryan's face drain of color when the letter was handed to him felt like a moment of reckoning. Ryan tried to brush it off. "Routine inquiry," he said, his voice tight. "Nothing to worry about." But I could see it. The CEO didn't buy it. His face said everything. His brow furrowed, his eyes narrowed. The tension in the room thickened. Ryan, usually so smooth and confident, started scrambling to put together documents that should have been ready ages ago. He was like a man trying to cover a fire with a piece of tissue paper, and it was obvious to everyone that he was in way over his head. I stayed back, watching from a distance. I knew the pressure was building, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Ryan's house of cards came crashing down. I could see it in his body language. He was trying to keep it together, but he wasn't fooling anyone anymore. Later that day, the CEO called a meeting. He wanted a compliance update, and I could feel the shift in the air as soon as I walked into the room. Ryan was there, of course, doing his best to hold on to his mask of calm, but I could see the cracks. When the CEO turned to me, I didn't hesitate. I reached into my bag, pulled out the binder I'd been quietly compiling for weeks, and handed it to him. It was heavy with every piece of evidence I had: contracts, emails, change logs, backdated paperwork. Everything that Ryan had tried to sweep under the rug was right there in front of him. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves. The CEO flipped through the binder, his face hardening with every page. Ryan, on the other hand, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying to maintain some semblance of control, but I could see the panic setting in. He knew this was the end. When the CEO looked up from the binder, the silence in the room felt suffocating. "Ryan," he said, his voice calm but loaded with finality, "can you explain this?" Ryan didn't answer at first, then muttered something about the intended efficiency of the process. But it was weak. His charm, the smooth talk, the swagger. It was all gone. He was cornered. I didn't need to hear the CEO's next words to know what was coming. The moment I handed over that binder, I knew it was over for Ryan. There was no escaping this. The truth was out, and it was only a matter of time before the fallout hit. Ryan had been untouchable for a long time, but now the cracks were too big to ignore. The board meeting was quiet, more tense than I'd ever felt it. Everyone knew something was coming, but nobody said it outright. Ryan sat there, his usual confident air nowhere to be found, while the CEO, calm and measured, looked down at the binder I'd handed him. The silence stretched, and then the CEO spoke. "Ryan," he said, his voice steady, "can you explain why these documents are missing? Where is the necessary certification for these vendors?" Ryan hesitated, his gaze darting around the room, searching for some escape. His usual smoothness was gone. I was in the process of gathering the documents. There were minor delays," he stammered. The board exchanged looks, none of them buying it. Ryan could spin the narrative all he wanted, but the evidence was irrefutable. The CEO's eyes didn't leave Ryan's face. "We've given you more than enough time to get this right," he said quietly. "The documentation should have been in place. This is not minor." Ryan opened his mouth again, but the words caught in his throat. The CEO's gaze shifted, the board members now fully attentive. "Your actions have put this company at risk, Ryan," the CEO continued. "I think it's time you step down." There was no dramatic outburst, no shouting or finger pointing, just the CEO's steady, unemotional words. It was over. Ryan's face flushed, and he stood up quickly, muttering under his breath as he gathered his things. There were no protests, no last-ditch efforts to explain himself. He just packed up his stuff, his once assured swagger replaced by quiet defeat. The board stayed silent, watching him walk out without another word. I didn't feel a rush of victory. I didn't need to. The fact that the board finally saw through him was enough. It was a quiet kind of justice, but it was justice all the same. In the aftermath, the changes were swift. The company started moving forward again, but the cracks Ryan had left behind weren't easy to fix. I wasn't expecting much, but the CEO called me into his office a few days later. "You've done the right thing," he said, his tone almost approving. "We need someone who can restore order to this department. I'm promoting you to VP of Compliance. You'll also have full access to the systems Ryan once controlled." I wasn't thrilled. The promotion didn't matter much to me. What mattered was that things were getting back on track, and it was my job to make sure they stayed there. As I walked out of the CEO's office, I ran into him in the hall. He nodded at me, and before I could say anything, he simply said, "Thank you." It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't about the position or the power. It was about restoring the integrity of the company. That was the real victory.